Leading away from Aegis VII, the sovereign colonies had discovered a separate signal from the one the markers seemed to emit. They would dub this as the Master Signal, creating 3 new monoliths of red. They would use their combined signals to triangulate the source of the markers, in hopes of conquering their foe on Earth. With the expedition being a success, the Colony Council would enact an expedition to venture forth and to find the source to the signal. And so, the Sovereign Colony Galactic Expedition had been formed. Following the signal, the Scav forces would find nothing but dead planets in its wake, until something would catch their prying eyes, a glimmer of hope as they approached the bright object in space, Tao Valantis. With the coordinates locked on their approach, they could see that this was indeed to be the site they had been searching for. With their confirmation of the location, they would send down teams to build a main base that would be stretched over into several bunkers and outposts across the surface of the planet. To their surprise, the marker homeworld hadn't been what they had expected. The high winds and cold temperature was more akin to that of Antarctica, with the surface being coated in a white blanket of snow and ice, with mountains forming out of the surface. The terrain was indeed filled with many rocks, making their journeys perilous. However, the colonies hadn't known this yet, but their task was to become far more horrifying and deadly than just the vacant planet of low temperatures. Hypothermia would not be the only thing on their mind here, as with the discovery of an underground civilization buried underneath the ice came many questions that would be answered with the help of an alien dubbed as Rosetta, who had been frozen for what seems like an eternity. They had used neurological technology to pull the information they had requested right out of her brain. However, as they were delving deeper into this lore this world had to offer, an enemy had begun to awaken from their slumber and began to savagely attack the Scav forces. This would lead into a bloody and brutal conflict that would span over the next few years. However, the colonies would find that a faction of bone and flesh wasn't to be the only force at play here. There was to be another one of steel and logic. Let's find out in the end of days how these creatures would have changed the story for either the better or for the far worse. In the endless, cold night, the wind was howling up a storm, a blizzard to be more exact. However, there was something else that began to howl in the black and white night. The necromorphs, as they had been sieging a Scaff battalion, of whom had been escorting a group of scientists that had been on their way back to the Rosetta lab after finding a bunker of unknown origin. Throughout the battle, the howling transformed into several roars, sounding like a human roaring out towards its prey. But this was to be more bestial, a mix of both human and various animal sounds coming out from the twisted and pulped vocal cords of this once alive man. The roars soon added another noise to fill the air, screams of soldiers being torn to shreds from the necromorphs' sheer willpower and might. The necromorphs had completely surrounded the men, using the blizzard and fog as cover in the night. Fortunately, the men had located an elevated platform from which they blast the enemy from above, with their weapons that look reminiscent of late 21st century design. The captain of this brigade would look around the platform, seeing the men below them being torn to shreds. He finally overcomes the shock of the situation and calls out to them, telling them to retreat back to the upper level. As he begins to blow his whistle, however, due to the constant gunfire, high winds, roars, and screams of nearby necromorphs and soldiers, many wouldn't hear him, and instead would still be torn down by the foul monstrosities. It would be at this time the captain calls out towards the communication officer, where he tells him that they need to call for pickup, or at least reinforcements. The officer would take this on board and attempts to call back to the nearby outpost. However, the only thing he could hear over the winds and noises of the battle was radio silence, with the crackling of the static in the radio waves. The captain, seeing that all of them making it out of this grisly situation was starting to look like a fantasy, he would apply his night vision filter over the lens that he had looked out from underneath his helmet. He would search frantically for an opening in the fog, or at least the necromorphs. However, seeing nothing, he disengages the lens filter and turns to his officer once again. The officer tells him that he cannot get through to the outpost or the base. The captain tells him to open up the rig's mobile radar system. Normally, the rigs would display a map of the surrounding area. However, for these officers, they had a variation of that system, which should prove instrumental for this situation. Over the following moments of the officer frantically looking at his display unit, the battle takes a turn for the worst, with the necromorphs beginning to scale the platform, looking for more to add to their unholy convergence. The last line of defense was looking to become very shaky when the officer gives the last hope to the captain, informing him that the west side of the platform has been abandoned by the horrors of the night. The captain, knowing that his own survival wasn't even a question at this point, would instruct the officer to take a couple of soldiers down the east stairwell and to escort the scientists back to the Rosetta labs, while the remaining forces are to stay behind to distract the necromorphs from their escape. He knew that even if they weren't to survive, they could at least take more than their combined souls out with them. The officer would accept the orders and takes the men and scientists to the east side with him. The battle continues as the captain issues out a call for covering fire. At this point, the necromorphs had claimed their staging ground on the upper platform, as their numbers continued to climb the walls and over the top railing. As the three escorts take the scientists into the snow, they make sure to be as quiet and slow as possible, as to not give away their position. With each step came the slightly audible crunch of the snow, which made the men feel uneasy as they had traveled. The officer would point out the direction they were headed, and the men without hesitation would proceed, taking the scientists with them. The officer would remark to himself that this was all for just some container, while seeing flashes of shots in the distance coming out from the soldiers' rifles. However, all the officer could see was the silhouettes of the men being slaughtered by the necromorphs, blocking out the light from the massive spotlights. As they continued to move further and further away, the screams and roars of the distant battle became weaker and weaker, and in the next 5 minutes, the screams had faded away into the blizzard, as if their life had just been snuffed out like a candle. The officer would catch up to the scientists and had asked what was inside the box. The scientists would claim that's restricted knowledge. They would begin to argue, thinking that they were safe to do so, being this far away from where the battle had originated. They were arguing about the lives that fell back there to be twisted into more horrific creatures, all for something smaller than a hand grenade. What they didn't know was their arguments had attracted something lurking in the darkness nearby. The officer would snatch the box away from the scientist, and it's when he would shout to leave the contents alone that he does not know what he is doing. He could damage what was stored inside, when a necromorph had sprung out from the night, slashing and tearing the scientists apart. The two rookies in the back would begin to spray bullets out without proper care of their own surroundings, which would cost a few more scientists of their lives. The officer, unable to locate his sidearm at this time, would grab the box in his hands, cupping them together as he attempts to drive the creature away by smacking it with his cupped hands. However, the necromorph would counterattack, knocking the officer to the ground, and his body would go limp for a moment. However, he would soon awaken from his daze a moment later, seeing the group of men and scientists' bodies lying in the snow, with spots and patches of blood coating nearby areas of rock and metal. He attempts to gain his composure. He begins to pick himself back up, seeing the two rookies panic in the distance as the slasher approaches them. The officer then sees one of the scientists had grabbed his sidearm before in the moment where he had taken the box from him. Then all of a sudden, he would feel a terrible gnawing pain inside his ear, as if something was burrowing deep into the canal. He attempts to pull whatever was inside his ear out, but his fingers were far too big. But he wouldn't worry for long, as the pain had suddenly stopped. Perhaps he had just hit his head on a rock, he thought, when he felt a very harsh, sharp pain, this time as if something had gained entry through his skull and into his brain. The man would scream out in pain, attracting the attention of the necromorph as it finished killing the pair. With it slowly moving towards him, he could hear the crunching of the snow under the necromorph's feet, along with the unsettling, gurgled noises coming from that jawless maw. Seeing it come out of the fog, locking eyes with it, the necromorph continued moving at a slow, methodical pace, as if subtly informing the man that his death is inevitable. The feeling had slowly turned from a sharp, horrifying pain to a numbing sensation, feeling what made him, slowly fading away, as if being deleted by a higher power. The memories of his family, friends, and colleagues drifting away into the mist where his mind used to be. Now the necromorph was mere feet away from him, poised to strike with its bone-plated scythe blades coming out of the palms. The man was indeed in another world. However, feeling his very being, his core of who he is, being torn from his mind, the fear of what was happening to himself and of the approaching predator was slowly being pushed out until he could feel absolutely nothing. The necromorph made a huge roar to the man lying in the snow, unable to do anything, as if it was savoring the moment. The necromorph had begun raising its arms into the air, pulling the blades back like a catapult. Then it would thrust forward in a striking motion towards the vulnerable man, until something catches the arm of the necromorph in mid-swing. The man then pulled himself up out of the snow, using the blade as leverage, looking at the necromorph's disfigured face as he rose with a very neutral look, with absolutely no emotion at all. The necromorph then tried to free itself of the human's grasp when it found that it could not. The predator had now become the prey, with the officer pulling back and ripping the arm off of the slasher. The necromorph would tumble backwards, regaining its composure very quickly, attempting to go in for another attack, when the man grabbed and ripped the other arm from the body, like a child ripping the wings off of a fly. The sheer strength of this person, it wasn't human anymore. It couldn't be. The necromorph roars at the man with the noise rinsing through him, with no facial reaction to the terror. The officer picks the necromorph up, holding it with both hands above his head, and then throws the slasher down the nearby cliffside. The officer just stares down into the abyss as the necromorph's scream fades into the darkness, and less than a minute later, a loud thud could be heard, echoing back up the cliff, signaling to the man that the creature had just met its end. He then proceeds to move towards the box that was slightly ajar now, and picks it up as he heads towards the Rosetta labs to deliver a new age to the sovereign colonies. Not one of blood and flesh, but one of steel and pure logic. Inside the halls of the Rosetta labs, two men were talking amongst themselves. These were Joseph and Vladimir, two members of the Death Wish squad. Vladimir was the leader of the squad, and Joseph being a soldier under his command. However, the two were quite comfortable working alongside each other, maintaining a friendship that helped them throughout various missions and to keep others in check.
So one thing I've never mentioned until now. What's the deal with your accent? Your name's a Russian name after all.
Well, it's quite simple, Joseph. My father had been Russian, but my mother was Italian who had kept her native tongue. And when the bombs fell in the first few battles of the rebellion, I kept the accent going as tribute to her.
Oh my. I'm sorry, Vlad.
It's quite alright, Joseph, but it's Vladimir. I am still your commanding officer after all.
Huh? I thought we were more than just soldiers to each other.
Of course we are. You are my best friend. But it's good to keep up appearances. Keeps the others in check. We can't have favoritism, can we?
I guess you're right.
Have I ever led you down the wrong path?
Well, there was that one time on the lunar colony. All right, you two. What's so funny?
General Mayhead, sir.
At ease. Well, what's so funny?
Just reminiscing on better times.
It's been a while, hasn't it? Being trapped here instead of the battle back home. Permission to speak, sir. Granted. How long till we get back to Earth, sir? Those things, they freak me out, sir. At this time, that's unknown. Yes, those things, or as Serrano puts it so enthusiastically, those necromorphs are quite a sight.
Quite a sight, sir. The very sight of them makes me want to turn in my breakfast.
I know the feeling, son. Right, small talk is over. Let's focus on what is important. You're both on guard patrol on the east side gate. Don't let anything get through. If it looks inhuman, tear it to shreds and sound the alarm. Understood?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good. Well, move out, soldiers.
The general soon departs as swiftly as he had appeared, like a puff of smoke. He had indeed had more pressing matters on his mind, such as the resident of the labs, the Rosetta alien. The scientists were anxious to learn more about the machine that controls the markers, and to learn of why they were telling them to shut it down. Why they, who have been calling to them, who had summoned them here, would ask for the device to be turned off. If it was to control them, the scientists had theorized that perhaps the markers couldn't grasp their full potential, and that's why the personnel are gaining visions in their sleep of turning the machine off. In the Death Wish's private quarters, the other two members of the team had been awaiting for their orders, playing cards to pass the time.
Come on, man. You're a quiet fellow, aren't you?
You'd be too if you knew my past, Rez.
Yeah, maybe. My past wasn't very eventful, other than what happened on Aegis VII.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that. Didn't something happen there? Those ghouls get there too?
You know I'm open to talking about the incident, but if you saw what I saw there, you wouldn't be eager to ask.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yes, there were signs, but more to the point, they weren't what I'm concerned about.
Not concerned about them? What could be more terrible than those monsters?
There were these capsules scattered around the station. Some of the men almost believed that they were the ones that created the black marker, the creators. But we haven't seen any signs of those things so far.
Maybe they're scared.
Oh, I don't think so. They had appendages that looked like a set of weapons on them.
Like knives for hands?
Not like that. No. They were like small mobile tanks.
Well, what happened?
They were moved closer to the marker. Some say they could hear whispers asking for the capsule to be left with the marker. One, however, was taken to a special vault where...
Oh, I've heard of that place. They keep the scariest and darkest objects there.
So the tale goes. Enough stories.
What about your sister? What happened to her?
Damn it, Henry! I told you before! She wasn't there! Maybe she found a way out. Maybe she was... you know.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rez.
So what of you? What's the big story you keep trapped in your closet?
Oh, I couldn't possibly. It's far worse.
Worse than losing a loved one?
Worse.
When are they gonna give us our next set of orders? Don't like all this waiting around.
You should be proud of yourself. Last mission, you saved Mahad from those things.
Yeah, well... the victories only really filled that void where my heart used to be. For a few moments, sometimes longer. But the feeling is a fleeting moment.
Maybe you need to move...
If you say move on, then I will shoot you.
You can't do that. You'll hang for it.
I'll be proud to put us both out of our misery.
You don't mean that, Rez.
Rez stares at Henry like a predator, forcing Henry to look away from his deathly stare. Outside, Joseph and Vladimir are patrolling on top of the gate, looking out for any wandering corpses that may have lost their way.
Even with the suit on, it still feels like we're living in a freezer.
Well, it is a frozen, dead planet, Joseph.
So how can we get this work? Where's Rez and Henry? Thought we were supposed to be a team. Have each other's back.
Oh, come now, Joseph. We don't need them for this. Plus, this will give you more experience for when we are locked in battle with the enemy back home.
If you say so. Although it's not like any more is going to happen tonight.
Well then, be happy for it.
Can I ask you something?
Go for it.
Well, these dreams, they keep getting worse.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. The ones I get, they seem to change every night as if trying to warn me of something.
Oh, really? All I seem to get in the dream lottery department are one of those things chasing me down endless corridors.
Let me guess, shiny skin, a gaping mouth, and blackened eyes, with the height of the creature being well over 7 feet tall.
Not exactly, no. Wait, did you say shiny skin?
Yeah, like it was made of a metal or another metallic material.
Can't say I've seen anything like that. But that almost sounds like something from one of those old B movies.
Yeah, exactly what I'd been thinking. Never liked those old films. My father loved them.
Mine too. Vlad, look here!
I told you before, don't... Oh my god, sound the alarm. I'll open the gates.
While the two had been talking, a man had been walking towards the main gate, illuminated by the spotlights. What the two had seen shocked them. A man covered by a crimson liquid. His face was incredibly pale. It looked as if he had been walking for a very long time in the -degree weather. Once the two had opened the gates, the man fell into a blanket of snow. They would turn him over to see that he had been clutching something in his hand, a rather small metal box.